Hey, welcome back everyone. Great segment in store. We're going to be talking about some updates on this CHAZ, this CHAZ site in Seattle. Trump said it is a terrorist takeover in Seattle, and he's calling on local government officials to take action or he will. Also, there are 70 test sites that have been destroyed, and this is as the United States is allegedly bracing for more outbreaks. And we'll also be looking at some different Chinese Communist Party propaganda and censorship that is now being exposed. Now, before we jump into it, I made an error on the last episode, so I wanted to issue a correction on that. I talked about the Paris Commune of 1871 and the French Revolution of 1789. Unfortunately, on the timeline, I put French Revolution afterwards. Yeah, that was about a 100-year difference, so I apologize for that. Now, with that said, let's jump into what's happening now in Seattle. Trump is saying this CHAZ site, this Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, as they're calling it, is a terrorist takeover in Seattle, and again, he's calling on local government officials to take action, saying if they do not, then he will. Governor Inslee in Seattle originally denied knowledge about the autonomous zone. Here's a clip of this now.
Thing called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. What's your thought on that? The fact that the protesters have taken that over and not allowing people to come and go freely? And then regarding the National Guard.
Well, that's news to me, so I'll have to reserve any comment about it. I have not heard anything about that.
Trump responded to this. He took to Twitter saying, quote, "Domestic terrorists have taken over Seattle, run by radical left Democrats. Of course, law and order." In another tweet that appears to be now removed, Trump also said, quote, "Radical left Governor Jay Inslee and the mayor of Seattle are being taunted and played at the level that our great country has never seen before. Take back your city now. If you don't do it, I will." Governor Inslee responded to Trump on Twitter saying this, quote, "A man who is totally incapable of governing should stay out of Washington State's business, stoop tweeting." And he's teasing Trump's misspelling of stop or stoop in that case. Seattle mayor responded to this. This is Jenny Durkin. She was defending, actually, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. She's calling them patriotic. During a press conference on Thursday, she said this.
"Unfortunately, our president wants to tell a story about domestic terrorists who have a radical agenda and are promoting a conspiracy and fits his law and order initiatives. It's simply not true. Lawfully gathering and expressing First Amendment rights, demanding we do better as a society, and providing true equity for communities of color is not terrorism. It is patriotism."
She also said President Trump's threat to send in federal resources to crack down on the protesters was, quote, "unconstitutional and illegal." Here's a clip of that now.
As I stated previously, it is unconstitutional and illegal to send military to Seattle.
Meanwhile, Andy No, one of the independent journalists who is pretty heavily covering this, posted on Twitter, quote, "The Antifa Capitol Autonomous Zone in Seattle has a subreddit set up. They are posting about making homemade chemical weapons, maintaining supply lines, and how to use those armed with guns to push police back. Also, Seattle police report there are allegations of armed guards and extortion in the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone." Here's a video of this.
"We have heard anecdotally reports of citizens and businesses being asked to pay a fee to operate within this area. This is the crime of extortion."
In addition to this, a law enforcement officer told Fox News that armed guards have been surrounding the perimeter of the Autonomous Zone and that residents of the area are, quote, "forced to show ID to prove that you belong there," as they're saying it. And the residents there are, quote, "begging for help because they are not being allowed into their homes without ID." Another tweet shows some of this mob justice taking place. Julio Rosas with Town Hall tweeted out, quote, "My latest report from Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Things are getting dangerous for people who are accused of wrongdoing. In one instance, an accused thief was surrounded by a crowd and interrogated, with one person brandishing a bat in his face." Here's a clip of that.
Thief! I didn't take. Because he probably threw it. Who knows? No, have you told something?
Yeah, what did this dude steal?
Also, some reports coming out now suggesting that these riots and these different takeovers we're seeing were planned ahead of time. Washington Times published an exclusive story saying that Antifa planned anti-government insurgency for months. They say this: activists of the far-left Antifa movement began planning to foment a nationwide anti-government insurgency as early as November, as the U.S. presidential campaign season kicked off in earnest. And this is according to a law enforcement official with access to intelligence behind the shadowy group. They continue, quote, Antifa's actions represent a hard break from the long tradition of a peaceful political process in the United States. This is a quote from National Security Council staff member Rich Higgins. And he continues, quote, their Marxist ideology seeks not only to influence elections in the short term, but to destroy the use of elections as the determining factor in political legitimacy. Added Joe Myers, a former Defense Intelligence Agency official and counterinsurgency expert, quote, President Trump's election and the revitalization of America are a threat to Antifa's nihilistic goals. They are fomenting this violence to create havoc, despair, and to target the Trump campaign for defeat in 2020. In addition to this, we're now seeing attempts to spread this type of model. Jumping into Portland now, again, Andy No reported, quote, rioters are grabbing whatever fencing they can find around downtown Portland to build their own autonomous zone. Here's a video clip. Now, there were several clips like that of these protesters, somewhat ironically trying to fence in, creating border walls for their new autonomous zones. In Portland, we should note that it appears the protesters have backed off of that plan. Reports say that they dispersed by themselves. NYPD officers, meanwhile, are retiring in droves over the leadership's handling of the riots. It's according to Daily Wire. And so in addition to this takeover, in addition to this what appears to be anarchy, if not warlordism, moving into some areas, you have police retiring in large numbers because of the pressure they're under. Now, right alongside these protests and these riots is also this coronavirus, this CCP virus, which a lot of people seem to have forgotten about. A lot of questions are being raised now. How serious is it? Can it really cause the damage that it was alleged to be able to cause? And also, did it justify the lockdowns? But the U.S. now is allegedly preparing for more outbreaks. And while facing that risk, allegedly 70 testing sites have been destroyed. Now, the White House Coronavirus Task Force is telling governors to prepare for spikes in cases caused by these George Floyd protests. And they're saying, with that, 70 testing sites have been destroyed. Now, this is according to The Blaze. They say, quote, in a conference call with governors Monday, top officials on the White House Coronavirus Task Force expressed concern that a spike in virus infections could result from the mass protests erupting across the country in recent days over the death of George Floyd. They have an audio clip, an audio recording of the call that was obtained by the Daily Beast, and Vice President Mike Pence can be heard bluntly stating that infection spikes due to protests are, quote, an issue our team is following and there is a concern. Coronavirus Response Coordinator Dr. Deborah Birx relayed fears that yelling by protesters may be counteracting the safety benefits of wearing a mask. And on that note too, if the incubation period of this virus is 2 weeks, as many reports have claimed, some have put it up to 40 days, 2 weeks is the most commonly accepted number, we're very likely going to see the effects of these protests. If it is as bad as they said it was, we're going to see the effects in about 10 days. Moving on, now we're talking about Chinese Communist Party propaganda and censorship now being exposed. First off, Twitter has taken down Chinese government-linked accounts that it says were pushing propaganda. And this comes in response to some of the criticism that Twitter has been receiving of selective censorship. They've been accused pretty heavily, even by President Trump himself, of possibly discriminating against conservatives in their censorship. And one of the big calls on that was, why do you allow these Chinese Communist Party propaganda accounts to openly spread disinformation on behalf of a foreign country when you're going and censoring Americans for expressing their own political views? Now, Twitter Inc. now has said that it removed from its platform about 174,000 accounts that it labeled as fake and operated by the Chinese Communist Party to push its narrative about the coronavirus, Hong Kong protests, and other topics. Also, the European Union is saying China is behind a, quote, huge wave of COVID-19 disinformation. Again, this coronavirus that we're all facing now. Now, this is according to The Guardian. It said, quote, "The European Commission said Russia and China were running targeted influence operations and disinformation campaigns in the EU and its neighborhood and globally. While the charge against Russia has been leveled on many occasions, this is the first time the EU executive has publicly named China as a source of disinformation." It says Apple has removed Pocket Cast, the popular iOS and Android podcast client, from the App Store in China. The Cyberspace Administration of China has determined that it can be used to access content deemed illegal in the country, and has demanded that Apple remove the app as a result. It's the second major podcast app to be removed from China's App Store this month. Now, Pocket Cast responded with a statement on their Twitter account saying, quote, "We believe podcasting is and should remain an open medium, free of government censorship. As such, we won't be censoring podcast content at their request." They continue, quote, "We understand this means that it's unlikely that our iOS app will be available in China, but feel it's a necessary step to take for any company that values the open distribution model that makes podcasting special." And Pocket Cast tells The Verge that Apple didn't provide specifics on which content violated Chinese law, instead suggesting that the team reached out to the Cyberspace Administration of China directly. And Pocket Cast wrote this on Twitter: "The overall reason was that we include content that is illegal in China as determined by the CAC." Now, the app was removed around 2 days after Apple contacted the developer. China represented its 7th biggest market and was considered to be growing. And on that note, this is taking place at a time when a lot of big companies, including Apple, are coming out and supporting these protests. They're claiming to support human rights. They're claiming to support things like freedom of speech, many of these companies, while at the same time folding to pressure from a totalitarian communist regime, literal communist regime, in this case, that openly abuses its citizens. And many Chinese netizens have been calling out this double standard that we're seeing. Now, in other news, in New York City, EMS workers are alleging retaliation after speaking out about the pandemic. NPR reported that, quote, "A group of New York City emergency medical service workers who gave interviews to the news media are suing the city for allegedly retaliating against them after speaking about their experiences responding to the COVID-19 pandemic." And it says this, quote, "In late April, the New York City Fire Department sent letters notifying 3 paramedics, including Elizabeth Bonilla, who spoke to NPR earlier that month, that they were restricted from treating patients according to the compliant. Workers on restricted status are not allowed to receive overtime or work for any other emergency medical services in the city's 911 system." And also we have an update now on Dr. Charles Lieber, this head of the chemistry department at Harvard who had ties to the Chinese regime, allegedly. The Justice Department is now saying that Harvard professor has been indicted on false statement charges. And they write this: "The former chair of Harvard University's Chemistry and Chemical Biology Department, Dr. Charles Lieber, was indicted today by a federal grand jury for 2 counts of making false statements to federal authorities regarding his participation in China's Thousand Talents program." Now, it goes on for a while about exactly the details of this, but here's what's really important, at least in my analysis. It is alleged that unbeknownst to Harvard University, beginning in 2011, Lieber became a, quote, "strategic scientist" at Wuhan University of Technology, WUT, in China. He later became contractual participant in China's Thousand Talents plan from at least 2012 through 2015. Now, importantly also, some of the programs he was working on were being done under Department of Defense grants. And so if he was working in addition to that for the Chinese regime and did not disclose that, that brings into a lot of questions of whether he was providing information to them, different issues such as that. Now, he's getting off on a pretty light charge compared to what they possibly could go after him on. He's being charged with making false statements, for lying to investigators about his connections to that Wuhan University. That said, folks, we'll be continuing our coverage on this. We're also going to be focusing again pretty heavily on China as well as other areas. So stick around Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. We're going to be broadcasting. And also, I'm going to make my first attempt this Sunday for a live video. Tune in 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be doing a live video chat, so Bring your questions to the table. I'll see if I can answer them. Now, also, folks, again, we're being censored on this channel. If you can, you want to show your support, please don't just, like and subscribe. We, of course, appreciate it, but also please share the video if you can try to help get the word out on this channel. That said, please take care of yourselves, stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you next time.